The woman with the raven-black hair stepped off the stagecoach into Jackson, Wyoming, and every man on the dusty street took 3 steps back like she carried plague in her carpetbag. It was June of 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden storefronts lining the main thoroughfare. Tessa Turner felt their eyes on her before she saw them, felt the weight of suspicion and fear that had followed her from 3 towns east. She held her head high anyway, her green eyes scanning the buildings until she found what she was looking for, a weathered sign that read, "Seamstress Wanted." Her fingers tightened on the handle of her bag as she walked toward it, ignoring the whispers that started immediately in her wake. "That is her," Old Man Peterson hissed from the front of the general store. "The one from Cheyenne. Heard her husband died falling off a roof just 2 months after they married. And her father before that," added the butcher, wiping his hands on his apron. "Wagon accident. Then her brother drowned crossing a river he had crossed 100 times before. 3 men dead in 5 years, all connected to her," Peterson continued, his voice carrying down the street. "She is cursed, mark my words. Bad luck follows that woman like a shadow." Tessa heard every word. She had heard variations of them in every town she had tried to settle in since Thomas died. Never mind that her husband had been drunk when he climbed that roof, or that her father's wagon had a broken axle the blacksmith had warned him about, or that her brother had been caught in a flash flood that claimed 2 other men the same day. People needed someone to blame for tragedy, and a young widow with the misfortune of losing multiple family members made an easy target. She pushed open the door to the dress shop, a bell chiming overhead. An older woman with silver hair looked up from her sewing, her expression shifting from welcoming to wary in an instant. "I saw your advertisement," Tessa said before the woman could speak. "I am an experienced seamstress. I can show you my work." The woman, Mrs. Harrington, set down her needle slowly. "I heard about you already. The men outside were talking." "The men outside do not know me," Tessa replied, her voice steady despite the familiar ache in her chest. "They know rumors and coincidences, nothing more, Mrs. Harrington studied her for a long moment, and Tessa saw something unexpected in her eyes, not fear but pity. That was almost worse. "I am sorry, dear, but I cannot risk it. My husband would never forgive me if something happened to him because I hired you. You understand?" Tessa did understand. She understood that she would never escape this, no matter how many towns she ran to. She understood that loneliness had become her permanent companion, and that the life she had once imagined for herself, a life with a home and perhaps more children after losing her first in childbirth, was nothing more than a foolish dream now. She walked back out into the sunlight, her eyes stinging but refusing to let tears fall. The men on the street had multiplied, gathering in small clusters, all watching her with expressions ranging from suspicion to outright hostility. She needed to find somewhere to stay, but the boarding house owner was among the crowd, and his face told her that door was already closed. "Excuse me, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and warm like honey and tea. Tessa turned to find a man leaning against the post outside the saloon, tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of tobacco. He wore dusty riding clothes and had a well-worn Stetson pushed back on his head. A cowboy, clearly, and one who had just ridden in from somewhere distant based on the dust coating his boots and the tiredness around his eyes. "Miss Turner, is it?" he asked, pushing off from the post and walking toward her with an easy, confident stride that suggested he had never questioned his right to exist in a space. "It is," she said carefully, squaring her shoulders. "And you have already heard the stories, I assume." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, and it transformed his entire face from handsome to devastating. "I heard old Peterson over there spewing nonsense about curses and bad luck, if that is what you mean." "It is not nonsense to them," Tessa said quietly. "And I have learned that arguing only makes it worse." "Then I will argue for you," the cowboy said. He turned to face the crowd of men, his voice carrying easily across the street. "I am looking for someone to help me with my ranch. Need someone who can sew, mend, cook, and keep a house while I am working the cattle and horses. Pay is fair, and there is a separate cabin on the property for privacy." Any objections? The silence that followed was deafening. Then Peterson stepped forward, his weathered face twisted with concern. "Jake, son, you do not know what you are doing. This woman is dangerous. Everyone connected to her dies." The cowboy, Jake, laughed outright at that. "Pete, I have been shot at, trampled by horses, nearly gored by a bull, and survived more bar fights than I can count. I think I can handle whatever bad luck the universe wants to throw at me." He turned back to Tessa, his brown eyes warm and sincere. "What do you say, Miss Turner? Want to take a chance on a stubborn cowboy who does not believe in curses?" Tessa stared at him, searching his face for signs of mockery or cruelty, but found only honest good humor and something else, something that looked almost like defiance. He was offering her a lifeline when everyone else was holding her underwater, and she knew she would be a fool not to grab it. "The pay is truly fair?" she asked. $20 a month plus room and board," Jake said. "The cabin is small but solid, and I promise I am not looking for anything improper. I need help and you need work. Seems simple to me." It was more than she had made at any of her previous positions back before the rumors started following her. Tessa nodded slowly. "Then yes, I accept." "Good," Jake said, and his smile widened. He turned back to the crowd. "Gentlemen, it has been a pleasure, but we will be heading out now. Pete, tell your wife her pie last Sunday was the best I have ever tasted." He tipped his hat to the assembled men, then gestured for Tessa to follow him toward a horse tied up outside the saloon. "You ride." "Not well," Tessa admitted. "That is fine. You can ride with me until we get to the ranch, and then we will figure out teaching you proper later. It is about an hour outside town." He untied the reins of a beautiful chestnut mare, then surprised Tessa by pulling a second horse from behind the saloon, a sturdy-looking gelding loaded with supplies. "Was planning to pack this one heavier, but your bag is light enough. We can manage." He helped her mount the gelding with surprising gentleness, his hands steady on her waist, and then swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease. They rode out of Jackson with every eye in town watching them go, and Tessa could feel the weight of their judgment like stones pressing against her back. They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes, the town disappearing behind them as they followed a well-worn trail through rolling grassland dotted with sage and wildflowers. The Teton Range rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. It was beautiful country, wild and open in a way that made Tessa's chest ache with something she could not quite name. "You did not have to do that," she finally said, breaking the silence. "Take me on, I mean. You will hear more stories now about yourself. They will say you are foolish or worse." Jake glanced over at her, his expression thoughtful. "Let them say what they want. I learned a long time ago that other people's opinions do not pay my bills or feed my cattle." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I lost my parents when I was 16. House fire. I was staying at a friend's place that night and I came home to ashes and smoke. Some people said I was lucky to survive. Others said it was suspicious that I was not there, implied maybe I had something to do with it. Neither was true. It was just a tragedy, pure and simple. Sometimes bad things happen, and there is no curse or conspiracy behind them, just life being cruel. Tessa felt something loosen in her chest at his words, a knot of tension she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "I am sorry about your parents." "And I am sorry about your family," Jake said. His voice was sincere, lacking the platitudes people usually offered. "I cannot imagine losing that many people you love. That must have been unbearable." "It was," Tessa said quietly. The tears she had held back in town threatened to surface now, but she blinked them away. "The worst part is not being allowed to grieve properly. Every time someone looks at me with fear instead of sympathy, it feels like they are taking something else from me. Like they are saying my loved ones' deaths do not matter, only the superstition does." "Their deaths matter," Jake said firmly, "and anyone who says otherwise is a fool." They rode on, the sun beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. The land here was gentler than in town, with cottonwood trees lining a creek that wound through the valley. Jake pointed out landmarks as they rode. The old trapper's cabin where he sometimes stayed during winter storms, the meadow where he had seen a grizzly bear the previous spring, the ridge where the sunrise was so beautiful it made him understand why men wrote poetry. "You are not what I expected," Tessa said as they forded the creek, the water cold and clear around the horse's legs. "What did you expect?" Jake asked, amusement coloring his voice. "Someone rougher, I suppose, less thoughtful." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Most cowboys I have met are more interested in whiskey and gambling than sunrises and poetry." Jake laughed at that, a rich, genuine sound that made something flutter in Tessa's stomach. "I like whiskey and poker as much as the next man, but a person can be more than one thing. My mother used to read to me every night before bed. Shakespeare, mostly. I suppose some of it stuck." The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and Tessa caught her breath at the sight. It was not large or grand, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. A sturdy log house with a covered porch, a barn in good repair, a corral with several horses, and off to the side, a smaller cabin with its own stone chimney. Fields stretched out behind the buildings, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. "The cabin is yours," Jake said, nodding toward the smaller building. "I had it built for my parents originally, when I was planning to bring them out here. After they died, I used it for storage, but I cleared it out last month when my previous housekeeper left to marry a miner up in Montana. There is a bed, a stove, a table and chairs. Basic but functional." He helped her down from the horse and led her to the cabin, pushing open the door to reveal a single room that was exactly as he had described. Simple and clean, with a narrow bed against one wall, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and a small table with 2 chairs near the window. There were hooks on the wall for hanging clothes, a wash basin on a stand, and a braided rug on the floor that added a touch of warmth to the space. "It is perfect," Tessa said, and she meant it. After weeks of sleeping in boarding houses and on floors, having a space of her own felt like a luxury beyond measure. "Good," Jake said, looking pleased. "Get yourself settled and then come over to the main house. I will show you around and we can discuss the work schedule. No rush, though. Take your time." He left her alone, and Tessa sank down onto the bed, her hands trembling slightly as the reality of her situation hit her. She was alone on a ranch with a man she did not know, miles from town, completely dependent on his goodwill and honesty. It should have terrified her, but instead, she felt something unexpected: hope. Jake Lawson had shown her more kindness in an hour than most people had in months, and while she knew better than to trust too quickly, she could not help the small spark of warmth that had taken root in her chest. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses on the hooks and placing her sewing kit on the table. She had a photograph of her family, taken 5 years earlier when everyone was still alive and smiling, and she set it carefully on the windowsill where she could see it each morning. Then she washed her face in the basin, pinned her hair more securely, and walked across the yard to the main house. Jake was on the porch, pouring water into a trough for the horses. He looked up as she approached and smiled, that same easy, genuine expression that made her heart do strange things in her chest. "Come on in. I will give you the tour." The main house was larger than the cabin but still modest, with a central room that served as kitchen and living space, and 2 smaller rooms off to the sides. One was clearly Jake's bedroom. The other appeared to be an office of sorts, with a desk covered in papers and ledgers. The kitchen was well stocked, with a good cast iron stove and plenty of pots and pans hanging from hooks on the wall. "I do most of my own cooking," Jake explained, "but I will not lie and say I am good at it. Beans and bacon get old fast. I am hoping you have a broader repertoire." "I do," Tessa assured him. "My mother taught me to make everything from biscuits to beef stew. I can bake bread, preserve vegetables, make pies if you have the fruit for them." Jake's eyes lit up at that. "There are wild berries all over the property. Raspberries, chokecherries, currants. I never knew what to do with them besides eat them straight from the bush." They discussed the work in more detail. Tessa would cook meals, keep the house clean, mend clothes and tack, and help with preserving food for winter. In return, she would have her cabin, meals, and the $20 a month Jake had promised. It was more than fair, and they both knew it. "Why are you really doing this?" Tessa asked as they stood on the porch, watching the sun sink lower toward the mountains. "You could have hired someone from town without any of the trouble I bring." Jake was quiet for a moment, his hands resting on the porch rail. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I suppose because I know what it is like to have people make up their minds about you based on things you cannot control. And because when I looked at you in town today, I did not see a curse or bad luck. I just saw a woman who was tired of fighting and deserved a chance." He turned to look at her, his brown eyes serious. "Besides, I meant what I said. I will take my chances." Something shifted in Tessa's chest at those words, like a door opening that she had thought was locked forever. She did not say anything, just nodded and looked out at the darkening landscape, feeling for the first time in a very long while that maybe, just maybe, things might work out. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Tessa threw herself into the work with a determination that surprised even herself, rising before dawn to start breakfast and not stopping until the dishes from dinner were washed and put away. She scrubbed floors that had not been properly cleaned in months, mended shirts and pants that had been sitting in a basket for who knew how long, and cooked meals that made Jake close his eyes in appreciation with the first bite. "If I had known you could cook like this, I would have offered you $30 a month," he said one evening, working his way through a plate of chicken and dumplings that Tessa had spent the afternoon preparing. "Do not get any ideas about renegotiating now," Tessa replied, but she could not quite suppress her smile. Cooking for someone who actually appreciated it, who thanked her after every meal and asked for seconds, was a pleasure she had forgotten existed. Jake, for his part, proved to be exactly what he had seemed in town: kind, honest, and hardworking. He was up before her every morning, already out with the cattle or horses by the time she arrived to start breakfast. He came in for meals dusty and exhausted, but always took time to wash up and sit down properly, to ask about her day and tell her about his. He was teaching her to ride in the evenings, patient and encouraging as she struggled to feel comfortable on horseback. never laughing at her mistakes or making her feel foolish. "You are doing great," he said one evening as she managed to trot in a circle around the corral without clutching desperately at the saddle horn. "Another few weeks and you will be racing me across the valley." "I think that might be optimistic," Tessa said, but she was grinning as she said it, exhilarated by the small victory. They fell into an easy rhythm, the kind that felt natural rather than forced. Tessa found herself looking forward to mealtimes, to the conversations they had about everything from ranch business to books they had read to childhood memories. Jake was well-read despite his rough occupation, and he had a sharp wit that caught her off guard in the best way. He made her laugh, something she had not done genuinely in longer than she could remember, but it was more than just laughter. There were quiet moments too, like when they sat on the porch after dinner watching the stars emerge, or when she looked up from her sewing to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. There was an awareness growing between them, a tension that was not uncomfortable but rather thrilling, like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. The men from town stayed away, which suited Tessa fine. Jake made weekly trips for supplies, and he came back with stories about the continued gossip and speculation. Some people were taking bets on how long he would last before tragedy struck. Others were spreading rumors that Tessa had bewitched him somehow, that he was under some kind of spell. "Pete asked if I was feeling all right," Jake said one evening, shaking his head in amusement as he unloaded supplies from his saddlebags. "Said I looked different. I think he was disappointed when I told him I have never felt better in my life." "You should not antagonize them," Tessa said, though she was fighting a smile. "Why not? They are being ridiculous." Jake set a bag of flour on the kitchen table and turned to face her, his expression more serious now. "Tessa, you have been here a month and nothing bad has happened. In fact, things have been better than they have been in years. The ranch is running smoothly. I am eating actual food instead of burnt bacon, and I have—" He trailed off, seeming to catch himself. "I have good company, that matters." Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks, and she busied herself with putting away supplies to hide her reaction. "I am glad I am working out satisfactorily." "Satisfactorily," Jake repeated, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. He was watching her with that same expression she had caught before, warm and intent. "That is one word for it, I suppose." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and Tessa felt her breath catch in her throat. But then Jake seemed to shake himself, turning back to the supplies with studied casualness, and the moment passed. Tessa told herself she was relieved, even as disappointment settled in her stomach. Late July brought scorching heat and the hard work of haying season. Tessa helped where she could, bringing water and food out to Jake and the 2 ranch hands he had hired for the harvest. She learned to stack hay and rake the cut grass into rows, her hands blistering despite the gloves Jake insisted she wear. It was exhausting work, but there was something satisfying about it too, about being part of something productive and necessary. One afternoon, as she was bringing lunch out to the far field, she heard shouting. She urged her horse, the gentle mare Jake had designated as hers, into a faster trot and arrived to find Jake standing over one of the ranch hands, a young man named Billy, who was clutching his arm and cursing. "What happened?" Tessa called, sliding off her horse with more confidence than she would have had a month ago. "Snake," Jake said tersely. "Rattler got him when he was moving hay." Tessa's blood ran cold. She rushed to Billy's side and examined the wound on his forearm, 2 puncture marks already swelling and angry red. "We need to get him to town, to the doctor." "No time," Jake said. "It is an hour ride and he needs treatment now." He looked at Tessa, his eyes steady despite the urgency of the situation. "You know anything about snakebite?" "A little," Tessa said, her mind racing through everything her mother had taught her about frontier medicine. "We need to keep him calm, keep the arm still and below his heart." "Do you have whiskey?" Jake nodded and sent the other ranch hand running for the barn where he kept a bottle for emergencies. Tessa helped Billy to the shade of a cottonwood tree, talking to him in a low, soothing voice even as her own heart hammered in her chest. She had seen snake bites before, had seen men die from them when the venom was not treated properly. This was exactly the kind of situation that would fuel the rumors about her, that would make people say she was cursed. But she could not think about that now. She focused on Billy, on keeping him calm and still while Jake brought water and the whiskey. She cleaned the wound carefully, then made him drink some of the whiskey for the pain. They bound his arm and kept him in the shade, monitoring him closely for signs of worsening symptoms. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Tessa stayed by Billy's side the entire time, checking his pulse and temperature, making sure he stayed hydrated. Jake stayed too, refusing to leave despite the work that still needed doing. As the sun began to set and Billy's symptoms started to improve rather than worsen, they both allowed themselves to hope. "I think he is going to be all right," Tessa finally said, sagging with relief. "Thanks to you," Jake said. His hand found hers in the growing darkness, his fingers warm and strong as they squeezed gently. "You saved his life." Billy recovered fully over the next few days, and word of what happened spread through town faster than wildfire. Tessa braced herself for the accusations, for people to claim she had somehow caused the snakebite or that Billy's survival was just a temporary reprieve before her curse claimed him. But instead, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Harrington, the seamstress who had refused to hire her, showed up at the ranch with a basket of food and a sheepish expression. "I heard what you did for Billy," she said, "and I wanted to apologize for how I treated you when you first arrived. I let fear and gossip guide me instead of giving you a fair chance. That was wrong of me." Over the next week, others came too. Not everyone, and not with the same warmth they might have shown someone else, but it was a start. The wall of hostility that had surrounded Tessa began to crack, and while she knew some people would never change their minds, she found herself caring less about their opinions with each passing day. "See," Jake said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "I told you there was no curse, just a capable woman who has had more than her share of bad luck." "You sound very smug about being right," Tessa said, but she was smiling. "I am not smug, I am just—" He trailed off, turning to look at her in the dim light. "I am just glad you are here." Something in his voice made Tessa's breath catch. She turned to face him fully and found him watching her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "Jake, I know this is not proper," Jake said quietly. "You work for me, and we have not known each other that long, and there are 100 reasons why I should not say what I am about to say. But I have never been good at doing what I am supposed to do, and I think you should know that I have feelings for you. Real ones. The kind that keep me up at night and make me look for excuses to see you during the day. The kind that made me offer you a job when every practical part of my brain was telling me not to get involved." Tessa's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. "You offered me the job because you felt sorry for me." "No," Jake said firmly. "I offered you the job because the moment I saw you standing in that street, refusing to cry even though I could see how much you were hurting, something in me recognized something in you. And every day since then has only confirmed what I felt in that first moment." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek with his calloused hand. "I am in love with you, Tessa Turner." And I know that is probably too fast and too much, but it is the truth, and I am not going to lie about how I feel." Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks before she could stop them, but they were not sad tears. They were the tears of someone who had been holding themselves together for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to let go. "I thought I would never feel this way about anyone again," she whispered. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. But then you came along with your ridiculous confidence and your kindness, and you made me remember what it feels like to hope for something more." "Is that a yes?" Jake asked, his thumb brushing away her tears with infinite gentleness. "That is a yes," Tessa said. And then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her, and it did not matter who moved first because they were meeting in the middle, coming together like two people who had been searching for each other without even knowing it. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and tentative and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Jake rested his forehead against hers and laughed softly. "Best chance I ever took," he murmured. They were married in September, as the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides and the air took on the crisp edge of coming autumn. It was a small ceremony in town, with Mrs. Harrington and a few others in attendance. Some people still stayed away, still clinging to their superstitions, but Tessa found she did not care. She had Jake standing beside her, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and that was enough. They held the reception at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food prepared by half the women in town who had slowly come around to accepting Tessa. There was music and dancing, and Jake spun her around under the stars while their friends clapped and cheered. It was perfect in a way that Tessa had never thought her life could be again, and when she caught sight of her family's photograph in the cabin window later that night, she silently thanked them for leading her to this moment, to this place, to this man who had been brave enough to take a chance on her. The first year of marriage brought challenges, as all first years do. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, figured out how to share space and make decisions together. There were arguments about silly things like how to organize the kitchen and serious things like whether to expand the ranch or keep it small and manageable. But through it all, there was love, steady and sure and growing deeper with each passing day. Tessa continued her work on the ranch, though now as partner rather than employee. She proved to have a good head for business, helping Jake with the books and negotiating better prices for their cattle in town. She also started taking and sewing work again, not because they needed the money, but because she enjoyed it and because it gave her a connection to the other women in the area. Jake continued to surprise her with his thoughtfulness, bringing her wildflowers he found while checking fence lines, reading to her in the evenings from books he ordered from back east, building her a proper sewing room in the house so she had space to work on her projects. He was endlessly patient with her fears, understanding when she panicked during a winter illness that laid him low with fever, holding her while she cried and promising her over and over that he was not going anywhere. "You are stuck with me," he said when the fever finally broke and he was well enough to sit up in bed. "Bad luck, curses, and all." "There was never any curse," Tessa said, kissing his forehead. "Just life being life." Spring of 1884 brought news that changed everything. Tessa was pregnant. She told Jake on a warm April evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, her hands trembling slightly as she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Are you sure?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with wonder and a touch of fear. "I am sure," Tessa said. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I went to town." Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt moisture on her cheeks that was not from her own tears. "We are going to have a baby," he whispered. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy. Tessa struggled with sickness in the early months and swelling in the later ones. Jake hovered constantly, driving her crazy with his concern and care, but she loved him for it anyway. He read everything he could find about childbirth and infant care, asked the doctor 1,000 questions, and made sure Tessa had everything she needed before she even knew she needed it. Old fears resurfaced as her due date approached. Tessa had lost a child before, had gone through the agony of labor only to have her baby girl live for mere hours before slipping away. The memory haunted her, especially in the dark hours of the night when she lay awake feeling the baby move inside her and praying to anyone who would listen that this time would be different. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked Jake one night, her voice small and frightened. "What if the curse is real and I lose this baby too? What if I lose you?" Jake gathered her into his arms, his hand spanning her swollen belly protectively. "Nothing is going to happen. You are strong and our baby is strong and we are going to be fine. All of us." He kissed her temple, then her lips. "I believe that with everything I am." His certainty steadied her, gave her something to hold on to when her own faith wavered. And when labor began on a hot August morning, Jake was there beside her, refusing to leave despite the doctor's suggestion that he wait outside like most husbands did. He held her hand through every contraction, wiped her face with cool cloths, and told her over and over how strong she was, how proud he was, how much he loved her. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Tessa sobbed with relief and joy. Jake cut the cord with shaking hands, then held their baby while the doctor tended to Tessa, staring at the tiny face with an expression of absolute awe. "He is beautiful," Jake whispered, carefully placing the baby in Tessa's arms. "He is perfect." "He is ours," Tessa said, unable to stop crying as she counted her son's fingers and toes, marveling at the miracle of him. "He is really ours." They named him James after Jake's father, and he was a healthy, happy baby who quickly became the center of their world. Tessa had worried that motherhood might bring back painful memories of the daughter she had lost, but instead, she found that loving James helped heal that old wound. She would never forget her first child, would always carry that loss with her, but she could hold both grief and joy now, understanding that life was big enough for both. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Word spread about Jake's honesty and the quality of his cattle, and his reputation brought buyers from as far as Denver. Tessa's sewing business grew as well, and she took on an apprentice, a young woman from town who reminded Tessa of herself at that age, eager to learn and hungry for independence. They had 2 more children, a daughter born in 1886 whom they named Catherine, and another son in 1888 whom they called William. The cabin Tessa had first lived in became a playhouse for the children, and Jake built an addition onto the main house to accommodate their growing family. The ranch that had once been a bachelor's property transformed into a true home, filled with noise and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of family life. The rumors about Tessa's curse faded into memory as the years passed without tragedy. People in town grew accustomed to seeing her and Jake together, watching as their family grew and their ranch thrived. Some of the old-timers still muttered occasionally about bad luck, but even they had to admit that nothing bad had happened, and eventually, they stopped bothering. Billy, the ranch hand who had been bitten by the snake, became a fixture on the ranch, eventually marrying and building his own small house on the property with Jake's help. Mrs. Harrington remained a friend, often coming out to visit and bring gifts for the children. The community that had once rejected Tessa gradually accepted her, not because she had proven she was not cursed, but because she had simply lived her life with grace and dignity, until they could not help but see her as she truly was. On a warm evening in June of 1892, exactly 10 years after Tessa had first stepped off that stagecoach in Jackson, she and Jake sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. James was 8 now, tall and serious like his father. Catherine was 6, with her mother's dark hair and green eyes. William was 4, a wild bundle of energy who kept them all on their toes. "You ever think about that first day?" Tessa asked, leaning against Jake's shoulder. "When you offered me the job all the time," Jake admitted. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "Best decision I ever made. The men in town said I was cursed and bad luck," Tessa said softly, repeating the words that had once caused her so much pain but now felt like nothing more than an old story. "You said you would take your chances." Jake turned to look at her, his brown eyes warm with love and affection that had only deepened over the years. "I did say that, and I would say it again, every single day for the rest of my life." He kissed her gently, thoroughly, in the way of a man who knew he had all the time in the world. "Though for the record, there was never any chance involved. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were the best luck I would ever have." Tessa kissed him back, pouring 10 years of gratitude and love into it, thinking about how far they had come from that dusty street where a lonely woman and a stubborn cowboy had defied a town's superstitions to find each other. She thought about her family, the one she had lost and the one she had built, and she understood now that grief and joy were not opposites, but rather two sides of the same coin, both necessary, both real, both part of the rich tapestry of a life fully lived. Their children's laughter rang out across the yard, and Jake squeezed her hand, and Tessa knew with absolute certainty that this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of pain or loss, but the courage to keep opening your heart even after it had been broken, to keep hoping even when hope seemed foolish, to take chances on love even when the world told you that you were not worth the risk. As the sun set over the Teton Range, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, Tessa Turner Lawson counted her blessings and found them too numerous to name. She had a husband who loved her fiercely and without reservation, children who were healthy and happy, a home that was filled with warmth and laughter, and a community that had learned to see past fear and superstition to the truth of who she really was. And it had all started because one cowboy had been brave enough to say those magic words, "Then I will take my chances." Those words had changed everything, had given her back her life and her future, and she would spend the rest of her days being grateful for them, and for the man who had spoken them with such confidence and conviction. The years continued to unfold in the way of all lives, with seasons of plenty and seasons of challenge, with moments of breathtaking joy and moments of quiet contentment. Jake's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Tessa found laugh lines deepening around her eyes. Their children grew and thrived, each developing their own personalities and dreams. James showed an aptitude for ranching and announced at 15 that he wanted to expand into horse breeding. Catherine discovered a love of books and teaching, often gathering the younger children in the area for impromptu lessons. William, ever the adventurer, talked constantly of seeing the world beyond Wyoming, though he always insisted he would come back. In 1895, Jake's ranch became one of the most respected operations in the territory, not through aggressive expansion but through steady, thoughtful growth and an emphasis on quality over quantity. He was elected to the town council, a position he accepted with reluctance, but fulfilled with the same integrity he brought to everything else. Tessa continued her sewing work, but also began teaching other women the craft, creating a small cooperative that allowed several families to earn extra income. They faced challenges, of course. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to the cold, dry summers when water was scarce, and the ever-present dangers of ranch life. Jake broke his leg in 1897 when a horse spooked and threw him, and Tessa nursed him through the long weeks of recovery with patience and love, teasing him gently about the role reversal. There were childhood illnesses that scared them both, money troubles that required difficult decisions, and the normal friction that comes with raising strong-willed children. But through it all, their love remained constant. If anything, it deepened and matured like good wine, becoming richer and more complex with age. They learned each other's rhythms so well that they could communicate with a glance, could offer comfort without words, could make each other laugh even in the midst of worry or stress. They built a partnership that was equal and respectful, where both voices mattered and both contributions were valued. One spring evening in 1899, as they prepared to celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary, Jake surprised Tessa by taking her back to the spot where he had first taught her to ride. The meadow was carpeted with wildflowers, a riot of color under the endless Wyoming sky. He had packed a picnic, and they sat on a blanket eating cold chicken and fresh bread, talking and laughing like the young couple they had once been. 15 years, Tessa marveled, shaking her head. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both things can be true, Jake said. He poured her a glass of wine from the bottle he had brought, then raised his own glass in a toast. To 15 more years and 15 after that, and as many as we can steal from this life. They clinked glasses and drank, and then Jake pulled a small box from his pocket. "I got you something." Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a pendant in the shape of a wildflower, the craftsmanship so fine that each petal seemed to shimmer with life. "Jake, it is beautiful," Tessa breathed. "I had it made special," Jake said, taking it from the box and fastening it around her neck. "That is a columbine, the flower that was blooming the first time you told me you loved me. I wanted you to have something to remember that we built something good together, something that grew from rocky soil into something beautiful and strong." Tessa touched the pendant, tears stinging her eyes. "I love you so much, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Jake said, pulling her into his arms. "My lucky charm, my second chance, my everything." They made love there in the meadow as the sun set, with 15 years of intimacy and trust between them, and it was sweet and passionate and perfect. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, both thinking about how improbable and precious their love story was, how easily it might never have happened if not for one moment of courage and defiance in a dusty town street. As the new century approached, bringing with it changes and challenges that no one could fully anticipate, the Lawson family remained a constant in Jackson, Wyoming. They were known for their generosity, their integrity, and the genuine affection that radiated from them whenever they were together. Children in town grew up hearing the story of how Jake and Tessa had met, how he had defied superstition to give her a chance, and how that single act of faith had blossomed into one of the great love stories of their community. The curse that had never really existed became a distant memory, mentioned only occasionally as a cautionary tale about the dangers of gossip and fear. Tessa Turner, the woman who had once been shunned and avoided, became Tessa Lawson, respected rancher's wife, skilled seamstress, devoted mother, and living proof that sometimes the greatest rewards come from the greatest risks. And through it all, Jake remained her steadfast partner, the man who had looked at her in her darkest moment and seen not a curse but a chance, not bad luck but infinite possibility. He had gambled on love when everyone told him not to, and he had won everything that mattered. Years later, when their grandchildren asked them to tell the story of how they met, Jake and Tessa would sit together on their porch, hands intertwined, and take turns sharing the tale. They never glossed over the hard parts, never pretended that the beginning had been easy or that love had conquered all without effort. But they always ended the same way, with Jake squeezing Tessa's hand and saying in his warm, honey-deep voice, "The men in town said she was cursed and bad luck." And I said, "Then I will take my chances." And taking that chance was the smartest thing I ever did, because it brought me everything I did not even know I was missing. It brought me home. And Tessa would lean her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart that had been her companion through nearly 2 decades of marriage, and she would add softly, "He saved my life that day. Not just by giving me a job, but by believing in me when I had almost stopped believing in myself. By seeing me as a person instead of a superstition. By loving me when I felt unlovable. That is the greatest gift anyone can give another person, and I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of it." "You were always worthy," Jake would insist, kissing the top of her head. "I just had the good sense to see it." The sun would be setting as they finished the story, as it always seemed to be, painting the sky in glorious colors, and their grandchildren would sit at their feet in rapt attention, absorbing not just the words but the love that infused every syllable. They would learn from their grandparents' example that courage comes in many forms, that love is a choice you make every day, and that sometimes the biggest risks yield the most beautiful rewards. As the evening deepened, and the first stars appeared, the family would gather for dinner, multiple generations crowding around tables pulled together in the ranch house that Jake had built with his own hands all those years ago. There would be laughter and good-natured arguments, children running underfoot, and the kind of warm chaos that only comes from a family that genuinely enjoys being together. And at the center of it all would be Jake and Tessa, still very much in love after all these years, still reaching for each other's hands across the table, still sharing private smiles that spoke of decades of shared jokes and memories and intimacies. They had built something extraordinary from the ashes of tragedy and the soil of superstition, had proven that love does not require perfect circumstances, only willing hearts. When the children finally left for the night and the house grew quiet, Jake and Tessa would sit together on their porch, as they had done countless times before, watching the moonlight silver the mountains and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. They would talk about small things and big things, or sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. "No regrets?" Jake would ask, as he sometimes did. "Not a single one," Tessa would answer, as she always did. "You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner," Jake would reply, pulling her close. "But I will take the years we have and be grateful for every one of them." And so they lived, Jake and Tessa Lawson, the cowboy who had defied a town's judgment and the woman who had been brave enough to hope again. They lived fully and loved deeply. They raised good children and built a legacy that extended far beyond their ranch's boundaries. They proved that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply choosing to believe in love when the world tells you not to, and that the greatest reward is a life shared with someone who sees you, truly sees you, and loves what they find. Their story became legend in Jackson, Wyoming, told and retold until the details blurred and embellished, but the heart of it always remained true. That love can flourish in the most unlikely soil, that faith in another person can move mountains, and that sometimes, just sometimes, taking a chance on someone everyone else has given up on can lead to the greatest happiness imaginable. And every time someone in town faced a choice between fear and faith, between judgment and compassion, someone would inevitably bring up Jake and Tessa Lawson as proof that the harder road, the braver road, was often the one that led to the most beautiful destinations. In the end, theirs was not a story about curses or luck, good or bad. It was a story about two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who chose each other again and again, despite obstacles and opposition, and who built a life together that was richer and fuller than either could have imagined alone. It was a story about the transformative power of being truly seen and valued, about the courage it takes to love and be loved, and about the simple, profound truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the chances we are brave enough to take. Jake Lawson took a chance on Tessa Turner one summer day in 1882, and that single act of courage and faith rippled outward in ways neither of them could have predicted, changing not just their lives but the lives of everyone they touched. And when they were old and gray and looking back on their years together, they both agreed that it had been worth every moment, every challenge, every leap of faith. Because in taking that chance, Jake had not just saved Tessa from a life of loneliness and suspicion. He had saved himself from a life only half lived, from the emptiness of a house that was never quite a home. And together, they had created something beautiful and enduring, a love story for the ages, and a family that would carry their legacy forward into generations yet unborn. That was the true magic, the real miracle. Not that tragedy had stopped touching their lives, but that they had learned to face it together, to hold each other through the storms and celebrate together in the sunshine. They had learned that love is not about avoiding pain or preventing loss, but about having someone beside you who makes the joys sweeter and the sorrows more bearable. And as they grew old together on their ranch in Wyoming, with their children and grandchildren around them and a lifetime of memories behind them, Jake and Tessa Lawson knew with absolute certainty that they had been blessed beyond measure, not because their lives had been easy, but because they had found each other and had the courage to build something lasting from that first improbable meeting. The cowboy had taken his chances, and he had won everything,